Without this one food, the world would go hungry. And, considering this is the most popular food in the world, you'd think people would know how to make it right and not make so many mistakes when cooking it. Well, we're going to talk about the world's most precious food that most people cook all wrong. Today on the Carefree Cooks Code, I'm Chef Todd Moore, and this is the Carefree Cooks Code, every Tuesday live at noon Eastern. Here's our challenge. How can home cooks cook freely, with creativity, confidence, and pride, while ignoring recipes and still impressing themselves and others with what they cook? Well, the answer is found in becoming empowered with how cooking works, using dependable and repeatable methods of cooking that work for any ingredient, for any diet, and any desire, just like chefs do. And we'll know we've cracked it when everyone sees cooking as an exciting and rewarding way to improve their relationships, their lifestyles, and their health through better food and cooking. This is the Carefree Cooks Code. Oh yeah, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the Carefree Cooks Code. Remember, we're live every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time. And for all the past episodes of Carefree Cooks Codes, or just about any other video that I post, go to my Facebook page. On the left-hand side there, it says videos. Click on videos. Let's repeat that. If you want to see any past episodes of Carefree Cooks Code, go to my Facebook page and click on videos, or the same videos are on my YouTube page as well. And now you can go to Instagram, follow me what I've been cooking for dinner. Oh my goodness, this pasta Alfredo, penne pasta and shrimp Alfredo, actually inspired by one of our Carefree cooks. I had to go home and make it, so see how I did it on Instagram. How do I do it so much, so often, all the time? Well, number one, all the restaurants are closed, but mostly because I'm a carefree cook. I create my own recipes. It enables me to be generous with my friends and family if they're not already together with me. I might have to change that line. But most importantly, I learn every time I cook. I create my own cooking style because I'm practicing pro methods and I love my cooking. That's what it means to be a carefree cook. Hey, I got a riddle for you today. I can be brown or white, but I'm not a loaf of bread. I can be sticky, but I'm not glue. I come from China, but I'm not a panda. I grow in a field, but I'm not corn. I'm used in sushi, but I'm not a fish. What am I? Rice. Rice, of course, that's what we're talking about today. And you can't take your kitchen on a food vacation anywhere in the world without being able to make some rice. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, I've got a true or a false for you. Again, tell me in the comment section below if this statement is food true or food false. Risotto pasta is made with hot broth or stock. True or false in the comment section below. Risotto pasta, hot broth or stock. In web cooking classes, in at least one of the web cooking classes, I start with a really simple statement, and it is, if it rained rice, the world would be fed. Now, seemed silly at the time, but until recently, I used to believe that some things were impossible. Looking around a very busy city where no one is out, and I find not everything is impossible, but, it's not likely that it's going to rain rice anytime, but you'll find rice all over the world, just like rain. I mean, it is as ubiquitous. Come on, I challenge you, try to name a world cuisine that doesn't have rice in it somehow. You can't. I'll bet you can't. So if this food item is all over the world, how come so many people have so much trouble cooking it? I mean, there are more questions swirling around rice than perhaps any other food staple in the kitchen. And It's just, maybe it's just that it's raining questions about rice on me lately, not actually raining rice, but oh my goodness, what kind of rice should I buy, Chef Todd? How long should I cook the rice? How much liquid should I use? Should I start in cold water or hot water? Should the rice be covered or uncovered? How do I make sticky rice? How do I make fluffy rice? Oh my goodness, it's such a really a simple item, but so many people have trouble with it, and I'm glad. Don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing you. I like when people don't understand things about cooking because that's what I do for a living. I help you understand these things, so these questions are wonderful questions, but sometimes it's enough to make you go, hey, I'll just switch to potatoes instead. Cooking potatoes is really easy. This rice thing, it seems so hard, but I'm here to tell you today that it's not. It is so simple because all of these easy questions, and they're easy questions, once you understand what's going on inside the kernel of rice itself. You're going to be able to answer all these questions for yourself. You're going to be able to command the methods for cooking rice by the time we're done here today, by 12:30. I mean, it's just another piece that you really got to have in your toolbox if you want to crack the Carefree Cook's Code. So let's go over a few rice rules, let's call them to start. First, understand that rice is a grass seed, okay? So, I mean, any of you that has planted a lawn, or planted vegetables or anything, you know what a seed is like, right? A seed is very hard. A seed is very crunchy. A seed is usually really starchy. Now, rice is a very special seed because it is the number one most important food crop for human beings on Earth. Now, it's number 3 in tonnage. We grow more sugarcane and corn all over the world, but much of that is used for something other than food. So when it comes down to it, rice is king when it comes to feeding mankind. And all these questions that I posed just a minute ago, they can be answered with just one concept. And you know I love to simplify things for you because this is when the learning mermaids happen, when you know the underlying concepts. And that's what I love to share with you. It all comes down to 2 components of starch found in rice. This is the way I always teach rice, and it makes it so much easier. You have amylose and amylopectin. Amylose is actually a sugar. It's a polysaccharide made up of glucose units. We're not going to get biology on you today. Just understand that it's one of the necessary components of starch. Now, amylopectin binds with the amylose to form starch. But here's the thing, in what proportions you have those 2 elements dictates how much liquid, how long you cook it, what dish you should use it with, and whether it's going to be sticky or fluffy. All rices are characterized as long, medium, or short. And this is the first clue. Just look at the rice. Just if you need a magnifying glass, which I suddenly do, just look at the rice and decide whether it's long, medium, or short, okay? So now here's the thing. If you find you have a long rices are higher in amylose. They have a tendency to remain intact in cooking. So think about rice-a-roni, the San Francisco dish. If you were born in the 60s, 70s, you remember the TV commercials, right? Rice-a-roni had that long grain rice in it. Always stayed intact. There were these long little quills. Think about your Uncle Ben and his wild rice. If you actually have an Uncle Ben, that probably just confused the heck out of you. No, I mean Uncle Ben's long grain rice. They're long grains of black or brown rices, but they aren't very sticky, are they? No, usually not. Think about your favorite Indian restaurant, your favorite Thai restaurant. You get that fragrant, really fluffy rice, right? Well, think about it from your memory, that very fluffy, fragrant rice in your Indian restaurant, your Thai restaurant, a lot of Indonesian restaurants. Is it long grain or short grain? It's long grain, right? And the longer the grain, the higher in amylose, the more fluffy the rice is going to be. So these types of rices, they generally need shorter cooking times. Rices higher in amylopectin are usually the shorter grain rices, and they are the stickier ones. Okay, so this is the other side of the spectrum. With more examples, what about that rice that used to come in the Chinese takeout food container, right? In the white square cardboard container, you open up the container, you turn it upside down, you take the container out, and the rice stays in the shape of the container, right? Think about it. Was that short grain rice or was that long grain rice when you used to get Chinese takeout? It starts to get really easy, right? And you're probably already a few steps ahead of me because you're thinking about sushi rice in your head, right? Perhaps the stickiest rice there is. Sushi rice, long or short? Short, you know it from memory. Sushi rice is almost round. It's so short. How about risotto? How about paella? Are these rices higher in amylose or amylopectin? Well, they're very sticky rices, right? They're higher in amylopectin and they have longer cooking times. It takes longer for the amylose to bind to the amylopectin to bind to the amylose, absorb liquids and swell. You know, anyone that has ever made risotto knows it's a patience game. And my favorite food movie in the world is called The Big Night. All about risotto. You get an opportunity to see The Big Night. Go watch that on Netflix. You might have time on your hands. But look, because the shorter grain rices keep their structure better, because they're higher in sugar than they are starch, you actually need less liquid to make a long grain rice than you do a shorter, stickier one that's higher in amylopectin. You get it? You're starting to catch on. It's just, they're long words. They sound like science words, but it's really similar. It's very, very simple. So we're going to go over rice ratios in just a few minutes, but we're going to review cooking methods as well. But for now, let me just make a general statement that the longer the rice, the more amylose, and those are better for steaming or simmering methods. I mean, you can steam long grain rices, again, because they need less liquid, they have shorter cooking times, but the stickier rices are better in combination cooking methods, and they're often coated in fat or sauteed first, and I'm going to explain why that's done in just a minute. I hope you're patient today, because there is a ton of information coming for you that's going to solve your rice problems for once and for all. So, examples of long grain rices are like jasmine rice, American long grain white, basmati. There are strains of black and brown rices that are long grains as well. They're grass seeds, most of the long grain rices. The short grain sticky rices, I've already mentioned, like arborio rice for risotto or bomba rice for paella, sushi rice for sushi, right? So many of the brown rices are also shorter grain and higher in amylopectin, but the fact that they are less processed, that they still have their outer coating intact, it inhibits the gelatinization of starches. So this is kind of like an exception to the rule. You can have a short grain brown rice that's not too sticky because it's not processed, because of the way that you cook it. So not every short grain rice is going to be more sticky. Short grain white rices will be. So ultimately, all right, this whole idea of short or long, brown or white is going to dictate whether you have a fluffy or sticky rice. So first, which type of rice are you going to cook? Is it a short grain rice or a long grain rice? Is it higher in amylose or is it higher in amylopectin? This is going to tell you the amount of time you cook it, the amount of liquid you're going to need to cook it in, the method you use to cook it, and whether it's going to be fluffy or sticky. It all comes down to this. So let's talk about some of the methods for cooking rice. And again, since rice is the dried seed of a grass plant, it would make sense that all of the rice cooking methods include some kind of moist heat. Now again, you can start a rice dish in direct conductive dry heat, like with a saute or something, but it's always going to finish in a flavorful liquid unless you like chipping your teeth, right? And when I say flavorful liquid, I don't mean water. Nothing has less flavor than water. Please don't make your rice with water. Make your rice with something flavorful. So, the most used method for rice is simmering. And quickly, let's remember the difference between boil, simmer, and poach, because this is one of the biggest mistakes home cooks make when making rice. Boil is violent. Boil is large bubbles at 212 degrees Fahrenheit or about 100 Celsius. Simmer is the next step below. This is softer convection to the liquid, lazy river kind of thing. Small bubbles around the edge of the pan. It's not violent at all. And this is about 185 degrees Fahrenheit or 85 Celsius. Poaching is even softer. Hardly any movement to the liquid. No bubbles whatsoever. This is 165 degrees Fahrenheit or 74 degrees Celsius. So you got to kind of go Goldilocks on this one, right? Boiling is too high. Poaching is too low. Simmering is just right. Go Goldilocks on your rice, not just your porridge. Your rice should never boil in the pot. The high temperature, the violent motion, it changes the entire chemistry of our new friends amylose and amylopectin that we want to treat so well. They turn to glue. The binding that goes on, the sugars and the starch, I don't need to go into it, but you ruin it. I mean, it's just too high. It's like flambeing a steak. It's too much. I mean, it doesn't literally turn to glue, but I know you can remember a time in your cooking life where you walked away from your rice, right? Then you came back, you realized it had been boiling, and you turned down the heat and you kept going with it. Was this not the stickiest rice that you ever made in your life, right? What else that you don't realize about a boil is that the moisture turns to steam. So if you're boiling your rice, that so much of that moisture is getting under the lid, it's evaporating into the atmosphere, and that's the liquid that your rice was supposed to be absorbing. That's the rice, the liquid that the rice needs for gelatinization. That's the liquid that the rice needs to swell up, but if you let it evaporate, it ruins that very important ratio of liquid to rice. If half your liquid evaporates into the sky because it was boiling, well, you look out the empty window to empty streets in downtown Baltimore below, and you forget about your rice, it means you're going to have a really hard concrete rice. And there's always going to be a simmering aspect to your cooking in rice. There's always going to be a simmer to it. So controlling moist heat is really important in making rices, really important in making any kind of starch, but you can also cook it in a combination cooking method. So I mentioned risotto, paella, and rice pilaf. These are three typical dishes that take advantage of cooking the raw rice grains in fat before you introduce the liquid. So cooking the rice grains in fat inhibits the gelatinization of starches. So in other words, you're slowing down the rice. You're slowing it from soaking up moisture and gelatinizing. And if you've got a really sticky rice, this can be a really good thing. I mean, if you let arboreal rice run wild, this rice high in amylopectin, it's going to be really sticky. It's going to be a gluey mess instead of the creamy, starchy texture that you should get if you just let it go crazy. And it's the same with bamba rice. For paella, the Spanish dish, it's made by sautéing the short grain rice in fat first, adding proteins, adding aromatics, and last adding the liquid. So if you coat your short grain rice in some kind of fat, it's going to slow down the stickiness. So imagine what this is going to do for a long grain rice, higher in amylose, right? Already fluffy on the other side of the spectrum. And that's what rice pilaf is. You take these long grain rices that are already fluffy rices, you saute them in oil or butter, or you just put it in the oven with liquid and fat, and you inhibit the gelatinization of a rice that already wasn't going to be sticky. So a really well-made rice that uses the pilaf method should be very fluffy. I mean, even dry, almost dry without anything sticking to each other. Think about your local Afghani or Pakistani restaurant. If you've tried any of these cuisines, they serve something called biryani. with their entrees. It's a long grain jasmine rice cooked in a pilaf method. It's like snow. I mean, it's just, we have a restaurant down the street from us here. The rice is like snow. It's unbelievable. But not only does coating the rice in fat inhibit the gelatinization of starches, so do acids. So have you ever noticed a slight tang? Probably not. If they're good at it, you didn't notice. But your sushi rice should have a little zip to it, you know? Would you notice if your Italian restaurant put a dash or two of balsamic vinegar in their paella, in their risotto, of course? Does the Spanish chef put some alcohol or lemons, citrus at the end of making the paella? Heck yeah, because just a few dashes of an acidic condiment after cooking the item, okay? This doesn't go in the liquid because you're inhibiting the gelatinization. It's flavoring afterward. It can make a short, sticky green rice and just lessen the stick factor a little bit. Good sushi, the reason I mentioned it, is it should get a little bit of sweet white or rice wine vinegar in the end, and it makes it just not so gummy, you know? Risotto can always get lemon juice. Your paella usually gets chopped up tomatoes at the end. Tomatoes are acidic, right? It accomplishes the same thing, inhibiting the gelatinization of starches, but afterward. Now, two other things to mention about moist cooking methods with rices. I mentioned it earlier. The first is that short grain rices can be steamed. And this indirect moist heat can do a really nice job in keeping the kernels separate because it cooks them at a higher temperature than simmering liquid, right? I told you simmering 185 Fahrenheit, steaming 212 plus when the item boils and turns to steam. And really the advantage of steaming over simmering is the higher heat that comes from the steam. So the next question was about whether we should start the rice in hot liquid versus cold liquid. Should you bring the liquid to a boil first and then add the rice, or should you mix the two up and then start the heat? It's a great question. And it's one I often wonder myself, but again, it returns to this whole idea of amylose versus amylopectin. In general, long grain rice that's going to use less liquid to cook more quickly, yielding a fluffier rice, okay? I've been repeating myself a few times now. This should be introduced into boiling liquid that is then reduced to a soft simmer. It's not cooked in a boil. The liquid starts at a boil, add the rice, lower to a simmer, because there's less gelatinization of starch. And also, these are usually the more processed white rices. With the outer layer removed, they're quicker in cooking. The higher heat helps them along. But short grain rices, which really can be done either way, it depends on the outcome that you're looking for. Short grain rices like arboreal rice, bamba rice that I've mentioned, they're usually sautéed first. But since you saute the thing, right, and it's already hot from the saute procedure, you need a hot liquid and add them in increments. So short grain rices are really hot on top of hot. I mean, if you think about this, you saute your arboreal rice for risotto, your bamba rice for paella. If you use cold liquids, even room temperature liquids for the risotto or paella, you're stopping the cooking. At every increment that you add, you're putting that so far back, then it's got to heat up again. It is very important to use a hot liquid with those short grain rices. But now brown rice, again, a totally different story. And without boring you with the Farmer's Almanac dissertation on the different layers in a grain of rice, let's just say that brown rice is wearing a scuba suit. Okay, imagine a neoprene scuba suit around a grain of rice, a really tiny one, very small one. There's this tough outer layer on the brown rice that gives it the crunchy texture and flavor that you want. Now, there's a lot of different results that you can get from cooking brown rice, but generally, what you're trying to do is unzip that scuba suit, you know, and get to the good starch inside. And that's why a brown rice is often soaked in warm water for up to about an hour or so before you apply heat to it. The warm water starts to crack the outer layer and get through the scuba suit to the good starchy stuff on the inside. Now, you don't have to soak your brown rice before you're cooking it. You can start the brown rice in cold water, mix it together, turn the heat on, and those early stages of cooking could crack that scuba suit also. Or you could bring the liquid to a boil, add the brown rice, turn it down to a simmer, but you're going to have a crunchier rice that absorbs less liquid. You need to use less liquid. Or if you really like crunchy rice, how about using both methods in kind of a contradictory way? What if you sauteed brown rice in butter or oil first, and then added stock in a slow fashion like the risotto method? Oh my goodness, you'd be slowing down the gelatinization of rice, of the starches in the rice that's already going to have a lot of trouble soaking up the liquid, right? And swelling and getting together. It's another thing I get so excited about, because you can control these outcomes when you know what's going on inside the rice. Rinsing your rice before cooking, no, you don't need to rinse your rice. It has a very small effect on the outcome because, like I just told you, it's hot water that helps in the gelatinization. It's hot water that rinses away the starch, especially if it's a white rice. If you're rinsing it, you're rinsing away minerals and nutrients that have been added, because if you see something like instant rice, like Uncle Ben's instant rice, again, all due respect to your uncle, whether he makes rice or not, but that instant rice means it's been processed. It's been par cooked, re-dried, and then it's sprayed with vitamins and nutrients that were washed away in the par cooking. I can't imagine being impatient enough to have to use instant rice. I mean, it's just, rice takes a while, you know? Let's work with it. Let's enjoy the process. All right, and lastly, let's talk about that all-important ratio of liquid to raw rice, because it is the difference between success and disaster. Let's return to the amylose versus amylopectin, the long versus short grain rice. And again, I'm going to make some generalizations here, because only you can decide if you like your rice stickier than normal or fluffier than normal. So here it is. Every rice you can make, from amylose to amylopectin, from long to short, it falls between a ratio of 1:1 and 1:3. That easy. The browner the rice, the more liquid you're going to need. The higher in amylopectin it is, the more liquid you're going to need, right? Think about this. But the longer the rice, the less liquid you're going to need. The higher in amylose, the less liquid you're going to need. So here's some example. Your basic long grain white rice like jasmine or basmati is going to use a 1 to 1.5 or 1 to 1.75 times the amount of liquid rice. You get the idea? 1 cup of raw rice, a cup and a half of liquid is the idea. 1 to 1.5 to 1 to 1.75. You decide. Somewhere in there. Make it, taste it, make it again, right? And look, it doesn't matter what measurement you're using. It's a ratio. So, I mean, I could make up a measurement on Mars and call it the zooplac, right? You would use 1 zooplac of raw rice and 1.5 zooplacs of flavorful liquid. Please don't write me. Please don't write customer service and ask if the ratio is cups or liters. It's both. It's all. It's a zooplac. Okay? Anything. A ratio means anything. You could take out a random cup in your cabinet, one of those random cups to 1.5 of those random cups. You get the idea? It's a ratio. Okay. So, an unrefined brown rice or a short grain arborio or bamba rice high in amylopectin is going to use a ratio of at least 1 to 2, and sometimes up to 1 to 3. So, I've already explained why brown rice needs that much more liquid, right? Cracking the scuba suit. But the short grain rices really soak up liquid. I mean, they really drink it up. And whenever I make risotto or paella, I make sure I have 4 or 5 times as much broth or stock, because so much evaporates during the cooking when you open the lid to add more, and so much is absorbed by the rice. But of course, it's always better to have more than less. Ha! Ooh, might be a new slogan. Always better to have more than less. So, start with 1 to 1.5 for your white rices, 1 to 1.2 for your brown rices, and 1 to 1.3 for your really sticky short rices. It's a simple way to do it, right? Simple approach. And you might find maybe your perfect rice is one zooplac of rice to 1.85 zooplacs of Martian chicken stock, I guess. It's like most things in cooking. Figure out what's right for you. What I did, I have an old measuring cup. I even drew a line with a magic marker. It's the perfect amount of liquid for a half a cup of raw rice for Heather and I, right? So you can ignore, if you want, everything I just said for 30 minutes. And you could do the spaghetti method if you want. It's actually called the rapid boil method, but you already know that boil is not a cooking method. And that's why I call it the spaghetti method. This is where you just fill up a pot with a whole bunch of water and you keep tasting the rice. And when it tastes done, you strain out all the water. But to me, this is so imprecise because you got to stand there and keep tasting the rice when it's boiling, and I don't like boiling anything. Plus, you lose a whole bunch of that starch that you throw down the drain. Having a ratio of liquid to rice is called the absorption method. It's where the rice absorbs all of the liquid, the absorption method. And that's why the absorption method always calls for a tight-fitting lid on your pan. You don't want you don't want the liquid to escape and evaporate. You want the rice to absorb it all, right? So once you identify your rice as short grain or long grain, white or brown, you can start to expect certain results. Then you think about the appropriate method for cooking the type of rice, the correct proportion of liquid that you're going to use to get the stickiness or fluffiness in the final product that you want. Rice too sticky? Well, saute it first in fat or mount it with an acid afterward. You know this now. If your rice is too sticky, saute it in fat, use less liquid, or add acid. If your fluffy rice is too sticky, well, you're probably using too much liquid, or you're letting it come to a boil. So, didn't think one person could know that much about rice, huh? And that's just half of it. I mean, I know I have a 4-hour rice class somewhere, but now that you have a good underlying concept of what goes on when you cook rice, from now on, you control the outcome and make the rice that you want. And I got a little bit of homework for you guys, okay? I'd like to see a whole bunch of rice dishes this week. Play around with this idea of long versus short and fluffy versus sticky. See if you can start with the intention of making the stickiest rice you've ever made or the fluffiest rice you've ever made using the tips that I gave you today, and observe how you control the process, because it's eye-opening. And it's a gateway. When you really start playing with rice, it's a gateway to start cooking with the multicultural cuisines all over the world in your own home. Being able to cook a variety of rices in a bunch of different methods means that you could take your kitchen on a food vacation anytime you want. The true or false today? Did I trick you? Did I trick you at the beginning? Yes, that's right. You do make risotto with hot broth or stock. But risotto's a rice, it's not a pasta. If I tricked you with risotto pasta, this statement is not true because it says risotto pasta, risotto rice. And now you know how to do it. And look, if you know someone who's having trouble controlling the sticky factor in their rice, please like this video. Share it with them too, because the world's #1 food is way too important to keep cooking it wrong. Look, we're going to be going rice crazy this week, all right? My plan is to be on live again, probably Wednesday, most probably Saturday. I'm thinking risotto, paella, maybe pilaf this week. And look, you don't want to be left out of any of the new Carefree Cooks Codes episodes, which are live on Tuesdays. So register for my alert system on email at webcookingclasses.com/live. And again, if you do miss an episode, remember, they are all found under my video archive on Facebook or YouTube. And if you want to be among the first to know when we will be cooking again together, because People keep telling me they're disappointed that they missed it, they didn't get on. That's why I keep telling you how to do this. Make sure your notifications are set correctly on Facebook. Right under the video on the top of my page is the follow button. Click that button, make sure you're following Chef Todd more, but there's even more because once you're following me, then you can click on the barely visible pencil next to notifications, choose standard to get a notification when I'm going live on Facebook. Click done, and you won't ever miss a pop-up live class again. So until next week, where we take even more steps toward cracking the Carefree Cook's Code, this is Chef Todd Moore reminding you that there's a method to your rice cooking success. Bye, everyone.